Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And our topics for tonight are pumping cash into politics, united front but time, and the plan of the Donald Trump forces to steal the election. I tried to put that into the Facebook title of this stream, and I was prohibited from doing so. So I had to edit the title and make it a little cleaner. Anyway, I'm going to start first with a piece about Bernie Sanders, or at least a piece about what Bernie Sanders had to say. And that comes from Common Dreams. And there's Bernie's picture now. And what Bernie said was, "That's oligarchy." He said, as billionaires pump cash into Trump campaign. Quote, "We must overturn the disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision and move to public funding of elections," unquote, said Bernie Sanders. Well, I think that statement by Bernie Sanders was probably just a few years too late. Still like to see it, but of course we have no time to do it before the election of 2024. This was written by Jake Johnson on October 16, 2024. Senator Bernie Sanders on Wednesday demanded action to curb billionaires' outsized influence on U.S. elections after new federal findings revealed that Tesla CEO Elon Musk and other ultra-rich Americans have pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into Donald Trump's presidential election campaign in recent months. In 3 months, 3 billionaires donated $220 million to Donald Trump, said Bernie on social media. He was referring to Musk, to Miriam Adelson, and Richard Uihlein. Quote, "Democracy is not billionaires buying elections. That's oligarchy. We must overturn the disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision and move to public funding of elections," unquote. Well, that would be great, of course, if it were practical. But I think the only way it's going to be practical is if there's a dump the corruption campaign, which already has people deciding to vote against anybody who takes big money from the oligarchs. And we are very far from that, okay, at this point. The article points out that both Trump and Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris have received financial support from members of the United States' increasingly wealthy and powerful business class. According to a Forbes tally, 27 billionaires, including Musk, have spent more than $1 million boosting the Trump campaign, while at least 28 have spent that amount in support of Harris. As far as I know, Harris is in the lead in fundraising, has a substantial lead over Trump by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, the 3 months we're talking about here, if I recall correctly, were July, August, and September. Of course, October's results are not in yet and probably will not be in until after the election. So we won't find out how much money is put into the campaign in October, but I think there's a very good chance that just as much money will be put in October as in the 3 preceding months, with the billionaires that we just mentioned leading the way. Of course, all this is possible because of the Citizens United decision of 2010. Uh, Robert Reich wrote on Wednesday, it's among the worst decisions in history. It corrupts our system every day. Cory Bush, who still is a representative in Congress, called for overturning of the decision. Of course, she was beaten in her primary campaign by super PAC money. According to the watchdog, Open Secrets and represent by U.S., quote, the top 1% of donors accounted for 99.1% of all the money raised by super PACs and hybrid PACs in the 2024 election cycle through September 2022. So last year, Representative Jayapal of Washington led more than 24 House Democrats in introducing the We the People Amendment, a proposed change for the U.S. Constitution that would specify, quote, that the rights provided by the Constitution are for people, not corporations, and that artificial entities have no constitutional rights, unquote. Quote, corporations are not people and money is not speech. Jayapal, the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, said after introducing the amendment, quote, in every election cycle since the disastrous Citizens United decision, we have seen more and more special interest dark money poured into campaigns across the country. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat of New Hampshire, introduced a similar amendment in the U.S. Senate in September 2023. Neither proposal in either chamber of Congress has received a vote. Of course not. But even if it did receive a vote, it would probably be a long time before it was ratified by the states. At least I don't see any evidence that it would be quickly ratified. And that is, I think, okay, the problem, or one of the problems. If you'll excuse me for a moment, I'm going to share this stream to my Facebook friends. Maybe we'll get a few more people here. My friend Robert Copeland says, Joe Firestone, let me say, dump the corruption will not work. Steve Day says, hi. And Dee says, hello, everyone. Well, if it doesn't work, I think our goose is cooked, because I don't think it can happen any other way that we get money out of politics. So there it is, and there we are. And I'm going to move to our second piece at this point. Let me get that up. Our second piece is also about cash in politics. And it is called Beyond Musk, Trump's most Trump's most dangerous, dirty dozen billionaire supporters. And Don Hazen is the author of this. He appeared in LA Progressive October 8, 2024, a little while ago. And Don Hazen was the author. And he says among Trump's billionaire supporters are some real doozies. Yeah, the doozies. And there's a cartoon. I'm a rich and successful financial wizard. Huge. Pay no attention to the little man behind the curtain. And of course, this is a takeoff on The Wizard of Oz. The article starts off, billionaires are all the rage. Their numbers and wealth are growing rapidly. They're buying giant yachts, holding, quote, over the top, unquote, parties to celebrate themselves, and in some key cases, making massive political donations to super PACs. According to Forbes, the U.S. now boasts a record 813 billionaires worth a combined $5.7 trillion. In my view, there should be no billionaires. And there would be no billionaires if we got money out of politics. We would be in a position to take care of the billionaires. The media has been preoccupied with which billionaires are supporting which presidential candidate. And it is true that both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have dozens of billionaires supporting them financially. But what kind of billionaires and why? Because the super rich come in all sorts of sizes, shapes, and oftentimes weirdness, says Don Hazen. Recently, I decided to look at the kinds of billionaires who are supporting Trump's campaign in the worst ways, as in many millions in political donations and expecting quid pro quos. I worked to create the dozen, quote, most dangerous, dirty billionaires, unquote, in Trump's pocket. It feels important to have a sense of the kind of billionaires supporting Trump. They provide a blueprint for what the super rich want from Trump in trade for their money. But along the way in my list creation, one thing became clear. While this batch of Trump billionaires are real doozies, one stood out from the crowd: Elon Musk. Musk's wealth, the world's richest person at $252 billion. His influence on Trump, his business success, Tesla, the U.S. government's dependent upon him, SpaceX for overseas military operating and rescuing stranded astronauts, and a hands-on role in Trump's campaign via his control of X, formerly Twitter, and a newly created PAC focusing on field operations in the battleground states, add up to Musk likely being the most powerful billionaire ever. So I spun off Musk is number one. That article is here, and he leaves a link to that other article. Should be added that Musk has seemingly at his beck and call a gaggle, perhaps as many as dozens of other libertarian, crypto-crazed venture investors and billionaires, who I have included as part of the Musk juggernaut. The other 11 billionaires on the list, and a surprise special credit, number 13, are plenty powerful, super rich, and driven to remake the world and add to their already obscene amount of dough. These are people whose fortunes are mainly derived from casino gambling, oil and gas, i.e. fossil fuel production and distribution, as well as speculative versions of extreme capitalism. The criteria for gaining a place on the, quote, dirty, dangerous, unquote, list: how huge is the wealth? How large are the payoffs in the guise of vast gifts to Trump-committed super PACs? Also, how active are these particular mega donors in radical conservative politics? This means how much will they push Trump in specific radical directions? Should he get elected as Israel-born Miriam Adelson, the eighth richest woman in the world, will do for the future of Israel and Palestine, or what Phil Dunn will do for Christian nationalism. Who is Phil Dunn, you ask? More on him coming up. A number of these donors have already succeeded in the lucrative and personally desirous quid pro quos from Trump the last time around. No doubt there will be many more should Trump be elected again. Finally, there is the weird factor. Obviously, this is not a simple category to assess. It is subjective, but since Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz put the word out there to define his Republican counterpart, J.D. Vance, it is apparent that from Trump on down, especially including Musk, that weirdness, and I interpret it as a subtle way of saying bizarreness, is frequently a factor among the Trump billionaires. When thinking about billionaires, there are several things to keep in mind when thinking about billionaires in politics. First, billionaires as a whole are often not constructive citizens. Quote, once billionaire wealth is accumulated, the way it is used casts doubt on how useful it is to have billionaires at all, writes Chuck Collins of inequality.org. Quote, the super rich use their wealth to pay as little tax as possible. Under many make active use of a secretive global network of tax havens, as revealed by the Panama Papers and other exposés. A perhaps surprising reality, given the depth of inequality in the country, is that most Americans do not see billionaires as destructive to their lives or society. Roughly 3 in 10 Americans, 29%, say the fact that there are some people who have personal fortunes of $1 billion or more is a bad thing for the country. The share of Americans who say having billionaires is a good thing for the country is 15%, but most Americans have no issue one way or another with billionaires. Overall, billionaire acceptance or apathy about them derives in part from the media attention heaped on them, which is mostly fawning. Obviously, billionaires have the resources for high-priced PR teams and intense lobbying on their behalf. It is also likely that a lot of people really do not understand how much a billion is. For the record, a billionaire is 1,000 million or a 1 with 9 zeros. 1 billion seconds is 37.1 years. So yes, it can be hard to wrap your mind around what a billion is. Number 2, Steven Schwartzman. Schwartzman, like Musk, is a titan among the Trump billionaires. His net worth is $38.4 billion. He is the founder, chairman, and CEO of the private equity firm Blackstone, the world's largest buyout firm with over $1 trillion in assets. The other 3 largest firms are Apollo, the Carlyle Group, which, by the way, is filled with Bushies, and Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts. The dangers with Schwartzman and his compatriots are obvious. Private equity's rapid growth and cutthroat profit seeking is a scourge that is undermining and destroying small businesses and communities across the land, affecting the lives of most Americans, whether they know it or not. Private equity has been busy buying up hospital chains, nursing homes, daycare centers, drugstores, software companies, warehouses, music rights, and other intellectual property, and much, much more, including veterinary care. More on that in a minute. As Morningstar reports, quote, overall, private equity assets under management have tripled to $12 trillion in less than a decade, roughly 30% of the market value of the entire U.S. stock market, unquote. Private equity firms, which essentially buy up businesses and companies that have not gone public and are not on the various stock exchanges, quote, are currently invested in about 14,300 companies in the United States, according to industry estimates, unquote. Forbes continues, quote, real estate is a massive business for just one company, Blackstone. It owns more than 12,000 properties in a commercial real estate portfolio worth nearly $600 billion. In Europe, it is the largest owner of warehouses and logistic facilities, unquote. For years, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, who's an expert on high finance, has railed about private equity's insidious impacts and introduced by legislation to regulate the sector. Quote, turning private equity and corporate greed loose in our healthcare system kills people, unquote, she said at an April 2024 press conference. And quote again, we need accountability here. Private equity should not be allowed to loot one business after another, unquote. In the recent book, These Are the Plunderers, How Private Equity Runs and Wrecks America, former New York Times financial journalist Gretchen Morgenson, policy analyst Joshua Rosner write, quote, the economic wreckage caused by the takeover titans is real and measurable. The riches amassed by the people overseeing these money-spinning machines are simply staggering. Theirs is a distorted kind of capitalism, a setup in which they benefit while many others lose. They have perfected the art of, quote, asshole capitalism, unquote, where citizens feel entitled to unlimited personal enrichment, even at social cost, unquote. As the authors explain, quote, the financiers we are highlighting take over companies in transactions using high-cost borrowed money raised in the corporate bond markets from investors willing to take on greater risks. They're not entrepreneurs or traditional business people prospering while creating jobs and opportunities for others. These men are America's modern age robber barons. Quote, the biggest private equity firms buy companies and load them with debt while bleeding them of assets and profits. A few years later, they sell these same companies off to new owners, perhaps in an initial public offering of stock, ideally at a substantial gain for themselves and their colleagues and partners. Often the companies they buy collapse in bankruptcy after the financiers have piled on the debt and extracted their profits. Their business model creates little value for society. In fact, their job cuts, higher costs of goods and services, and exploitation of the tax code have worn the nation's social fabric thin, unquote. Excuse me 1 second. So yes, Schwartzman sits at the pinnacle of the hugely profitable private equity sector. In fact, he personally received a record income of nearly $1.3 billion in 2022. The second year in a row, he took in more than $1 billion. The haul came mostly from more than $1 billion in dividend payments due to his ownership of nearly 20% of the private equity group shares. In addition, he earned $190 million in, quote, carried interest, unquote, pay, which involves a massive tax break, a policy that persists despite aggressive efforts for reform. Schwartzman bizarrely shows what a sacred cow carried interest, quote unquote, is to the oligarchs when he once compared a modest increase in the tax rate on carried interest to Hitler's invasion of Poland, as described in Brian Klass's Garden of Forking Paths series on Substack. Private equity's tentacles reach into our lives in unexpected ways, such as care of our pets. But many Americans welcome more pets into their homes through the COVID-19 pandemic. At the same time, medical costs for pets have surged. As Fortune noted, these firms have rapidly acquired veterinary practices and now own nearly 30% of the marketplace. Quote, Senator Elizabeth Warren and Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal say that private equity firms have, quote, spent billions on buying up veterinary practices and then profiting while reducing quality of care, increasing prices for pet owners, and making working conditions even harder for veterinarians, Fortune reported. Given that more than 2/3 of U.S. households own a pet, corporate consolidation of veterinary care and an accompanying rise in prices represents a major issue for American consumers and a life and death issue for their pets. unquote, the senators wrote, adding, quote, private equity roll-ups of veterinary practices harm veterinarians and customers alike, unquote. I have experienced the situation firsthand. Our household has a couple of cats, and one needed significant care. We found that at our local Berkeley Dog and Cat Hospital, the rates had gone through the roof, while the quality of service had deteriorated. The hospital is now owned by KKR. Number 3, John Paulson. John Paulson represents the hedge fund crew on this list. The carried interest billionaires. Paulson gained fame and personally made $4 billion shorting the U.S. housing market using credit default swaps before the 2008 crash. This super deal transformed him from an obscure money manager to a financial legend, unquote, Bloomberg reported. Today he's worth $3.5 billion. He's reportedly a pal of Trump's and might become Treasury Secretary should Trump win. One of his major powers is as a Trump bundler, coordinating large campaign contributions from others. He hosted a $50 million fundraiser for Trump at his Palm Beach home in April 2024. He co-hosted a Manhattan fundraiser in May with billionaires Woody Johnson and John Katsimatidis, and hosted yet another fundraiser with another billionaire, Howard Lutnick, the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, in the Hamptons in August. Paulson is part of the pattern of these super rich money guys who have houses in Palm Beach while also hanging out in the Hamptons in the summer when it gets too hot in Florida. Recently, he attracted some negative publicity for himself when publicly complaining that the $400,000 a month beachfront mansion he was renting in the Hamptons reeked of mice, excrement, and mold, making his 35-year-old fiancée sick. Paulson is 68. He sued the owner for $5.9 million. It was said that Paulson blindsided his wife of 20 years with his affair with Elena de Almeida, a health guru. According to the New York Post, is pregnant. The result is a contested divorce with Paulson's wife suing for $1 billion. Number 4, Phil Dunn. Texas's Phil Dunn is Trump's new Christian nationalist kingpin. He is high among the, quote, dirty dozen billionaires given his decades of successful dominance of Texas politics. Dunn established himself as one of Trump's newest and largest mega donors in December, cutting a $5 million check to make America great again, a pro-Trump super PAC. According to a deeply researched article in Rolling Stone by Tim Dickinson, quote, the MAGA Inc. ads Trump is helping pay for reflect his dark worldview. Quote, one features a voiceover in which Trump presents himself as a demigod of cultural revenge. Quote again, I am your warrior. I am your justice, unquote, he intones. And, quote again, and for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution, unquote. Utilizing his $2 billion war chest from the selling of his fracking empire, Dunn is investing millions in support of Trump, but also moving to be a power broker in Trumpian politics in Washington. Dickinson explains that Dunn signed on as a founding director of America First Policy Institute, AFPI, which some are calling a White House in waiting, quote unquote. The former head of Dunn's Texas think tank, Brooke Rollins, another ex-Trump advisor, is the CEO of AFPI. Okay, I'm going to leave that here and skip now. Number 5 is Adelson. Now, specifically, Miriam Adelson, the casino billionaire and widow, of Sheldon Adelson, who was Israeli born and who was educated, in Israel. And if I recall correctly, she's either an MD, or a PhD, highly educated, roughly the 8th richest woman in the world with a net worth of $33.3 billion. On August 16th, CNBC reported she was prepared to, to do whatever was necessary to get Trump back to the White House, unquote, which suggested a version of a blank check, though it is likely the number will be around 100 million. Adelson has reactivated the Preserve America PAC after Nikki Haley dropped out of the presidential race. It has already started spending large sums on pro-Trump ads in key states. As New York Magazine reported, if Trump wins, Adelson will become one of the most powerful private citizens with a say in American foreign policy. Beyond unconditional support for the Israel-Hamas war, one can assume she'll press for Israel annexing the West Bank and the U.S. recognizing its sovereignty there. However, this position is not just unpopular, it's illegal under international law. That is not Adelson's primary concern. October 7th was, quote, another kind of Holocaust, unquote, she said in a recent speech, unquote. Okay. So I'm going to leave that here with respect to Adelson and switch to the number 6 guy, which is Timothy Mellon. I'll just sort of cover this very briefly. As of mid-August, he had given $125 million to the Trump Super PAC, that is the Make America Great Again Super PAC. That is very interesting. And of course, we also know he gave $25 million to Bobby Kennedy. I'm not going to go much into Mellon. Number 7 is Steve Wynn. He's a real estate developer, an art collector, and is a big-time casino mogul who's been part of the funding apparatus for Trump, actually, from the beginning. The Wall Street Journal published allegations by several women that he sexually harassed or assaulted them at his hotels. In 2023, he ended a years-long fight with Nevada gambling regulators, paid a $10 million fine, and agreed to sever his ties to the industry he helped shape. So I'm going to skip him for a minute. Number 8 is Harold Hamm. It's a former truck driver turned fracking king. He founded and chairs Continental Resources, one of the nation's biggest independent oil companies. Forbes pegs his net worth at $18.5 billion. I'm going to go increasingly quickly through this list now. Kelsey Warren, K is number 9. He co-founded the pipeline company Energy Transfer in 1996 and remains the executive chairman. Okay. He's worth $6.2 billion. In 2017, despite protests, Energy Transfer finished building a $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline after an executive order by President Donald Trump. Warren also got a seat on the board of trustees at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts for his support. Forbes gave Warren its lowest score for philanthropy, a 1. This indicates he was the lowest of 20% of billionaires who were rated for philanthropy. Number 10 was Isaac Ike Perlmutter. He's an Israeli-American billionaire businessman. He and his wife Laura have donated more than $10 million this election cycle to a pro-Trump super PAC. Perlmutter, who is 81, appears to be unusual among the dirty dozen, quote unquote, having been in the entertainment business as Marvel Entertainment's longtime chair and CEO. However, his powerful role there evolved as a consequence of elaborate wheeling and dealing to get control of various companies. But Disney bought Marvel in December of 2009, which gave Perlmutter more than 1.3 billion. He initially stayed on as CEO, but in 2015, his oversight of Marvel was removed. One speculated reason, according to Vanity Fair, was Perlmutter's aversion to paying black actors as much as their white colleagues. Quote, Perlmutter allegedly told former chairman of Disney Computer Products, Sandy Mooney, that no one would notice because black people, quote, look the same, unquote. 2023, he was pushed out of Disney, also along with another Trump supporting billionaire Nelson Peltz. He used his business stock to try unsuccessfully to claim a seat on the board and try to force out the head of Disney, Bob Iger. After losing his fight, he sold all of his 25.6 million Disney shares. Not going to go further. Number 11 is Robert and Patricia Duggan. Okay, the Duggans. As we know, weird is a word applied by Tim Walz to some of the antics of his Republican counterpart, J.D. Vance. And other Republicans, maybe it applies to top Trump donors, okay, the Duggans and others too, especially Robert Bigelow, who's next on the list. Okay, the Duggans divorced in 2017 and have 8 children, but they continue to think alike. They each gave the pro-Trump America First Action Inc. at least $4 million in 2020 and continue to give this year. Both are longtime loyal members and huge donors of the Church of Scientology. So I'm going to leave these two here now, but of course they're very important too. Excuse me, to Donald Trump. Okay, Bigelow, number 12 on the Dirty Dozen list. Certainly Musk at the top of this list has much weirdness baked into his personality and history, but then there isn't anyone in national politics remotely as weird or psychopathic as Donald Trump, says the author. There are hundreds of examples, his obsession with Hannibal Lecter being just one. What makes Bigelow weird is his 2 long-standing obsessions with UFOs and extraterrestrial visitors, and with consciousness after death. Bigelow, born and residing in Las Vegas, recently told Reuters, I gave Trump $1 million toward his legal fees a few weeks ago. I made a promise to give him $20 million more. That will be to the super PAC. Okay, so I won't say too much more about him. There's an extra credit for Leonard Badleo. He's not part of the Dirty Dozen because he doesn't meet the overall criteria in terms of huge personal wealth. But he sure is dangerous, and he now has more than $1 billion at his proposal for right-wing causes. As Trump's advisor, Leo, a conservative Catholic, both selected candidates for the Supreme Court and directed the multi-million dollar media campaigns to confirm them. The most striking result of his efforts is the Supreme Court's conservative supermajority, which recently eliminated constitutional protections for abortion rights. It has made a series of pro-business sweeping decisions. On top of that, the court made one of the most radical decisions in the history of the court by ruling that in some cases presidents have full immunity for their actions, even if criminal behavior is done in the course of their role as president. That was a very conservative statement of what the court had ruled. It was quite understated. Uh, According to America, a Jesuit publication, two-thirds of the Supreme Court is Catholic, despite Catholics making up 20% of the U.S. population. 5 of the 6 courts' conservative supermajority are Catholic, which led to the overthrow of Roe v. Wade, which was the law of the land for the past 46 years. Leo hit the jackpot when he reaped a $1.6 billion windfall from a single donor when Barry Side, a 90-year-old manufacturing magnate, funded a new group run by Leo, who is also co-chair of the Federalist Society. That was the largest known donation to a political advocacy group in history. So this was a very interesting survey of the billionaires behind Trump. I could go more into this article, but I'm going to leave it here. And I'm going to check out your comments. Robert Copeland says, one of the so-called billionaires is really weird, and I'm speaking about Donald Trump. Evelina says, hello. Steve Wolfbrand says, hello, everybody. Robert says, housing advocates are going against Blackstone and other corporate landlords that are in the California Apartment Association in support of Prop 33 and Prop 34. Supporting Prop 33 is my main goal until Election Day. Well, thank you, Robert. Evelina Ponce says, evidently antitrust laws are not enforced in the United States. No, they are badly enforced in the United States, but there's been the most frequent enforcement of them since Biden took over. Antitrust enforcement is coming back and probably will come back under Harris as well. Well, Steve Overman says, Robert, I haven't really looked over my ballot yet, but will support that. Robert Copeland says, Steve, look who is funding all politicians and ballot measures when you get a campaign mailer or TV ad. Evelina says, are there loopholes private equities use to bypass antitrust laws? Yes, I'm certain there are, but I haven't been reading in this and cannot answer which are the loopholes. Steve Wolfbrand says, I can't even imagine having $1 billion. I'm just a squirrel looking for a nut. I do think the carried interest loophole is one of the loopholes. Steve Day says, thanks, Joe. I got text from Cairo. I gotta go. Okay, Steve Day. Bigelow is a former owner of Skinwalker Ranch, which has a lot of strange activity, including sights, of UFOs. Steve Wolpert said, I'm back. A lot of competition tonight. Sabi and also DD. Not entirely sure who DD is. It could be Dan Davis, I guess, but I'm not certain who you mean by DD. So, okay, going further now into our third piece. We have a lot of pieces for tonight and no time to do them, I'm afraid. Third piece is by Tom Hartman. It's a piece on the Supreme Court's dark money crisis. And it is an outstanding piece. Supreme Court's dark money crisis, Senator Wyden's by Revolutionary Fix, how expanding and regulating the court could save America from the GOP billionaires. Tom wrote this on October 9th, 2024, in the Hartman Report. Uh, 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court are up to their old tricks, ruling this week that Texas' draconian abortion ban can continue without modification, meaning that more women in that state will die or bleed out to the point where their lives are in danger and or their ability to have future children is ended. They're doing this in part because the court has been captured by a fringe right-wing Catholic death cult, the result of an intentional, well-funded campaign. Long-time readers of the Hartman Report know I've written extensively on the corruption of the Supreme Court by the billionaires who fund and control the GOP. I've written 2 entire books about the court, on equal protection, how corporations became, quote, people, unquote, and the hidden history of the Supreme Court and the betrayal of America, hoping to stimulate interest in the topic and get some legislative solutions to this out-of-control institution that is absolutely unanswerable to the people of the United States. They're answerable if the people of the United States get organized. But first, of course, dump the corruption, which changes the House at Senate, and then pressuring the House and Senate to take care of the Supreme Court. Oregon Democratic Senator Ron Wyden, who's been a frequent guest on my radio TV program, was apparently listening, or at least is on the same wavelength. He's proposed new legislation that would pretty much solve the major problems with our court and corruption-proof it as we go forward, along with efforts to get money out of politics and establish an absolute right to vote. Wyden's Judicial Modernization and Transparency Act is one of the most important pieces of legislation Democrats have put forward in years. It would, as he lays out on his Senate website, expand the Supreme Court to 15 justices. Now, of course, I'm for that expansion to 15 justices. He's the first person in Congress to be that sensible. The other people are suggesting it be expanded to 13 justices. But here's the problem with Ron Wyden's idea. The expansion is staggered over a total of 12 years, with the president getting to appoint 1 nominee in the first and third years of each presidential campaign. That is not what we need. We need to end the domination of the Supreme Court by these 6 justices, and quickly. We need to do it immediately. It won't wait. There are decisions that have to be overturned. We cannot stagger this. We've got to give the 6 new justices to a single president who is not a Republican to act and to appoint those 6 justices. That's what we need to do. The expansion can't be staggered over a total of 12 years. Why that is in there, I have no idea. It's the kind of pre-compromise you see from Democrats before any fighting over legislation gets started. Here's something else. Establish a new supermajority, 2/3 vote threshold to overturn acts of Congress on a constitutional basis at both the Supreme Court and the circuit court level. I have to point out that without the appointment of any new justices, the supermajority of 6-3 is realized right now in the current court, because there are 6 of the Republicans on that court. They have a supermajority. That's been part of the problem. Okay, but still, I think this is a good idea when coupled with expanding the court to 15 justices. Require that relief granted by lower courts in cases seeking to invalidate an act of Congress expire upon the issuing date of an opinion by the Supreme Court. I suppose that's a good idea. I really can't evaluate it immediately. Establish a new process for Supreme Court nominations that are not reported out of committee within 180 calendar days to be automatically placed on the Senate calendar, thus ending a little trick that let Senator McConnell steal 2 seats by rigging the Senate schedule. Expand the number of circuit courts to 15 to deal with the crisis of our courts and return to the practice of assigning one Supreme Court justice to oversee each circuit. Currently, there are 13 circuit courts and only 9 SCOTUS justices. I like that, of course. Expand the number of circuits by splitting the Ninth Circuit and establishing a new Southwestern Circuit. That seems to make sense to me, too. Expand the number of circuit court and district court judgeships to improve access to justice. The bill increases transparency to improve public trust by requiring all justices to consider recusal motions and make their written opinions publicly available. Any justice would be recused from a case upon the affirmative vote of the other justices. Requiring the public disclosure of how each justice voted for any case within the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. No more unsigned but decisions. I think that's a great idea. All decisions should be signed. Requiring the IRS to initiate an audit of each justice's income tax return and any amended return as quickly as practicable after it is filed. Within 90 days of filing, the IRS would be required to publicly release the returns and provide an update on the status of the audit. Every 180 days after, the IRS must update the public on the status of the audit. It will also release the ultimate findings of the audit. Requiring those nominated to the court to include their most recent 3 years of tax returns in their publicly available financial disclosure filings. In the case that a nominee does not disclose the tax returns within 15 days after nomination, the Administrative Office of the United States Courts would be instructed to obtain the tax returns from the Secretary of the Treasury and make them public. The Secretary of the Treasury is instructed to redact certain personal entity information. Wyden's bill is breathtaking in its breadth and scope and is the perfect companion bill to a binding and enforceable code of ethics for Supreme Court justices. And the public is ready for it. Approval of the court is at an historic low. Rather than pussyfooting around the topic, Democrats should be taking the court on hard and often. It's not only important for our democracy, it's also good politics. It won't happen, of course, unless the Democrats win the House, win the Senate, and win the presidency. So if you want to see the Supreme Court improved and reformed, you know who you have to vote for, in the election of 2024. In the elections of 2024, the presidential election, House elections, also Senate elections. In a recent podcast from David Sirota's news site, The Lever, Republican Senator John Thune tells a story of how he took down Democratic Senate leader Tom Daschle by campaigning relentlessly on Republicans taking control of the Supreme Court. Thune bragged to his audience, "It was one of our biggest applause lines. The Supreme Court is an issue that Republicans have been using to win elections since the 1950s, and Democrats have tragically ignored. As a result, Republicans on the court, among other things, stripped Americans of our voting rights, blocked President Biden's efforts to reduce student debt, allowed red states to deny low-income workers access to Medicare, endorsed massive voter purges. They legalized political bribery and dark money. Also, foreign involvement in our elections, which we now see, of course, through the super PACs. Easy. Given corporations access to the Bill of Rights, gutted unions' rights and the right to unionize, endorsed discrimination against queer and other minority communities, largely ended affirmative action, ended the power of the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases, created an entire billionaire and corporate run dark money machine, handed the 2000 election to its loser, blocked or slowed federal and state prosecutions of Trump, placed the president above the law, made themselves the sole arbiters of what a president may or may not do, ended women's constitutional right to abortion, radically cut back on Americans' right to protest, filled our streets and schools with guns, and legalized the equivalent of uh, uh, um, uh, machine guns. Hopefully, Wyden's legislation can make it into law, enabling us to rescue our republic from the clutches of the corrupt, the retrograde Republicans on the court who have seized it. It's another vital reason we must do we can to hold the Senate and White House this November, along with retaking the House. And he ends by saying, votes. I certainly agree with vote. I agree with most of Wyden's program, except, of course, taking 12 years to fix the Supreme Court situation. I think that's ridiculous. Absolutely and utterly ridiculous. What motivated him to do that, I don't know. Some sense of, oh, I'm a moderate, I'm not going to be too extreme. That's ridiculous. Okay, back to your comments. Oh, do dissidence, yeah. DD, do dissidence. DD is do dissidence. Okay, it's also Dan Davis. Steve, who is DD? Okay, DD is interviewing Jill Stein at the moment. I'm trying to watch everything, laugh out loud. I think Republicans will take control of both houses and executive branch, okay, in November. Steve, no way. No way. NW. Uh, uh, um, do dissidents, spelling. I don't know. I'm blanking on the spelling, Steve. I'm sorry. So Steve says, Joe just lost me telling us to vote for Day, uh, for Democrats. Sorry. Yeah, I normally don't do things like that. And if I had my druthers, okay, I would have voted for Jill Stein in this state, as well. But as I think I told you before, I am persuaded that Jill Stein has absolutely no chance, and Trump is totally unacceptable to me. I am sorry, totally unacceptable to me, and I'll cover that. Uh, okay, I'm going to cover that now because that comes up now. Okay. This is a piece by Bob Reich. Another vote blue no matter who, I guess. He is, generally speaking. But I think this is a good post. He says Trump's closing argument, full throated fascism. He published it today, October 17th. And there he has in his cartoon, okay, there is Trump uh, with the swastika replacing the M sign. Friends, he says, last week Trump claimed that Kamala Harris, quote, has imported an army of illegal gang members and migrant criminals from the dungeons of the third world, from prisons and jails and insane asylums and mental institutions, and she has had them resettled beautifully into your community to prey upon uh, innocent American uh, uh, citizens. On Sunday, Trump told Fox News host, specifically Maria Bartiromo, the biggest problem on election day will, quote, not be the people who have come in who are destroying our country, unquote, but rather, quote, the people from within. We have some very bad people, 6 people, radical left lunatics, and it should be easily handled if necessary by National Guard or if really necessary by the military, unquote. On Monday, he closed his remarks to a crowd in Pennsylvania by saying his political opponents, quote, are so bad and frankly, they're evil. They're evil. What they've done, they've weaponized our elections. They've done things that nobody thought was even possible, unquote. Trump is a master of projection, psychological projection. You know what that is. These are echoes of a Nazism that flourished in Europe 19 years ago. Trump's closing argument of the 2024 election campaign is full-throated fascism. Retired General Mark A. Milley, whom Trump picked to serve as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, warned that former President Donald Trump is a, quote, fascist to the core, unquote, and, quote, the most dangerous person to this country, unquote, in new comments, voicing his mounting alarm at the prospects of the Republican nominee's election to another term. According to a forthcoming book by Washington Post associate editor Bob Woodward, former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney sees, quote, no reason to disagree with Milley's assessment, unquote, adding that, quote, the people that stopped Trump from his worst desires last time around won't serve again. Okay, I dislike having to agree with Liz Cheney, okay, on anything because I think she's 3/4 of the way to fascism herself. But anyway, in this case, I do agree with her. On Monday, Hillary Clinton, I hesitate to agree with her also because I think she's 3/4 of the way to fascism herself, posted that the rhetoric Trump is using now is, quote, blatantly fascist, unquote. Robert Rice says Trump has always had fascist tendencies, but fascist thuggery has now become the core of his presidential campaign. Fascism, different from, more dangerous than authoritarianism, has 5 elements, all of which are now central features of what Trump is offering voters. 1, the rejection of democracy, the rule of law, and equal rights under law in favor of strongman. Here are quotes from Trump. Quote, I am your voice, unquote, Trump 2016. Quote, the election was stolen, unquote, Trump 2020. Quote, I am your warrior, I am your justice, I am your retribution, unquote, Trump 2023. Fascists, quote, strongmen, unquote, are assumed to be above the law, above any legal or constitutional constraints because they supposedly give voice to the people. 2, the galvanizing of popular rage against political opponents. Quote, the people from within are bad people, sick people, radical left lunatics, unquote, Trump 2024. Quote, we will root out the communists, the Marxists, the fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat. Cheat on elections, unquote, Trump 2023. Quote, your enemies, unquote, are, quote, media elites, unquote, Trump 2016. Fascists encourage public rage at political opponents for being the, quote, enemy within, unquote, the country and seek revenge against them. In doing so, fascists create mass parties that often encourage violence. 3, nationalism based on a dominant, quote, superior, unquote, race and historic bloodlines. Quote, migrants will cut your throat, unquote, they have, quote, bad genes, unquote, unquote, Trump 2024. Quote, tremendous infectious disease is pouring across the border, unquote, Trump 2015. Quote, Jewish people that vote for a Democrat show great disloyalty, unquote, Trump 2019. Quote, getting critical race theory out of our schools is a matter of national survival, unquote, Trump 2022. Fascism manufactures fears of groups it considers genetically inferior based on race, ethnicity, religion, or historic bloodlines, and whom it treats as subhuman. Fascists worry about disloyalty and sabotage coming from such groups within a nation. These, quote, others, unquote, are scapegoated, excluded, expelled, sometimes even killed. Fascists believe Schools and universities must teach values that celebrate the dominant race, religion, and bloodline, and not truths that denigrate the dominant group, such as America's history of genocide and racism. 4. Extolling brute strength and heroic warriors. Quote, "You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong." Trump, January 6, 2021. Fascists assert that a nation's well-being depends on the leadership of the strongest and elimination of the weakest. For the fascists, war and violence means strengthening society by culling the weak and identifying heroic warriors. Number 5, a disdain of women and fear of non-standard gender identities or sexual orientation. Quote, "When you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything," unquote. Trump, 2005. Quote, "You have to treat them like shit," unquote. Trump, 1992. Quote, I will promote positive education about the nuclear family rather than erasing the things that uh, uh, make men and women different, unquote. Trump, 2023. Fascism is organized around the hierarchy of male dominance. The fascist heroic warrior is male. Women are relegated to subservient roles. In fascism, anything that challenges the traditional heroic male roles of protector, provider, and control of the family is considered a threat to the social order. Fascism seeks to eliminate homosexual, transgender, and queer people because they're thought to challenge or weaken the heroic uh, male warrior. These 5 core elements of fascism reinforce each other. The rejection of democracy in favor of a strong man depends on galvanizing popular rage against perceived enemies outside the nation and within. The popular rage draws on bigotry directed against supposedly inferior subhuman groups who are assumed to threaten the, quote, purity, unquote, of the dominant group. That bigotry is supposedly justified by social Darwinist survival of the fittest, which is thought to strengthen the race or dominant group as a whole. The dominant group maintains itself through tests of its strength, as exemplified by heroic warriors. Strength, violence, and the heroic warrior are centered on male dominance and the subjugation of women. All of these 5 core elements find expression in Trumpian fascism. All can also be found in the current Trump Republican Party. The mainstream media in America is by now comfortable talking and writing about Trump's authoritarianism, but in describing what Trump is seeking to impose on America, the media should be using the term, quote, fascism, unquote. These 5 elements appear in the works of cultural theorists Umberto Eco, historians Emilio Gentili and Ian Kershaw, political scientist Roger Griffin, and the former U.S. Secretary of State, uh, specifically Madeleine Albright, who I have to add was 3/4 of the way to fascism herself. So maybe she's in a position to say what it is. So, okay, I'll take your comments on that. You know about how I feel about some of what he said here, but I still think this is a very interesting list of things that Trump had said and how they fit into a particular model, okay, of fascism. So I thought that was worthwhile to cover. I'm going to go back to your comments. Steve says, but Democrats are not happening for me. Autocorrect is killing them. Doc, do you watch Tucker's show? On occasion, not often. I think Doc needs to open his vision to people like Tucker and Megyn Kelly. Come on. I know enough about Tucker. I've watched his show enough. okay, to be able to say that you cannot trust, okay, what Tucker says. He lies through his teeth very frequently, and he's done that since the beginning of his career. Sometimes he's right, just like a broken clock is right, but twice a day. Doc, you just can't listen to those. Thank you. Those that agree with you. I listen to people who disagree with me also. That's how I know that some of the ones who disagree with me are entirely full of shit. Lana says hi all at 9:10 p.m. On Thursdays, Lana, I come on at 8 o'clock. Okay, so I am going to go to the next piece. I got to leave here soon to go to help out with Dee's thing, but I'm going to go through. So here's a piece by Norman Solomon, Time for a United Front Against Trump and Realism About Harris. The policy that Harris has defended for a war on Gaza is despicable, yet she is the only candidate who can spare us from another Trump presidency, which from all indications would be far worse than the first. And I totally agree with that. This is from Norman Solomon, Common Dreams. With election day just 3 weeks off and voting already underway in some states, the race for president is down to the wire. The progressives could make a difference. Now, no one in their left mind plans to vote for the fascistic and unhinged former U.S. President Donald Trump. Some say they won't vote for Vice President Harris because of her loyalty to President Joe Biden's support for the Israeli war in Gaza. That might enable Trump to win enough electoral votes from swing states, and of course he mentions the swing states. These 7 states are where progressives may hold the future in their voting hands. The policy that Harris has defended for the war in Gaza is despicable. At the same time, she's the only candidate who can spare us from another Trump presidency, which from all indications would be far worse than the first one. I think it's important to point that out, but I think it's also important to argue, uh, uh, that a Harris presidency would not be worse and would be better than a second Trump term, and to provide some reasons why that is the case. Yeah, we need to be spared from another presidency of Donald Trump, but there are good arguments for saying we need to be spared from a Harris presidency as well. So all this, who we vote for, lies in whether we feel that Harris will be just as terrible as Trump or worse, or whether we feel that she would be somewhat better, than Trump. And I think that many of the progressives are likely disagree with that. Okay, I know many of my friends think that Harris will be so bad that they feel they have to vote for Jill Stein or for Cornel West, or for Claudia de la Cruz. I respect their decisions in this case. For me, I think there will be certain positive aspects coming from a presidency of Harris. But I'm going to go on with the article. The need is urgent for dialectics, a method of examining, discussing opposing ideas in order to find the truth, quote unquote. In this case, the truth of what's needed at this electoral crossroads of fateful history. The harms of the other options mean that the best course of action is to vote for Harris. 25 Islamic clerics said in a letter released last week. They focused on the overarching truth. Quote, particularly in swing states, a vote for a third party could enable Trump to win that state and therefore the election, unquote. and the U.S. clerics called such a vote, quote, both a moral and a strategic failure. Personally, as a resident of solid blue California, I have no intention of voting for Harris. So there it is. But if I lived in one of the seven swing states, I wouldn't hesitate to join in voting for her as the only way to defeat Trump. I don't live in one of the seven swing states, but neither do I live in one of the states that are locked down for Harris. Okay. I say either for Harris or for Jill Stein or for someone other than Trump. So my vote against Trump took the form, okay, of voting for Harris. It now looks like this particular state, that is Virginia, is going to beat Trump by a pretty large margin, but I've already voted and I'm not able to take it back. At the beginning, I didn't think it was a safe state. Some speak of the need to exercise conscience rather than voting for Harris. Well, I think I exercise conscience. Yet in swing states, what kind of, quote, conscience is so self focused that it risks doing harm to others as a result of a Trump presidency? Well, I have to add the kind of conscience uh, that's focused on the possible damage that a Harris presidency might do. In other words, there is that. If it becomes a reality, the Trump Vance administration will force progressives back on their heels, but necessarily preoccupied with trying to mitigate the onslaught of massive damage being inflicted by right wing zealots with vast government power. On domestic policies involving racism, reproductive rights, civil liberties, the environment, climate, labor rights, social safety net, civil rights, voting rights, LGBTQ rights, freedom of speech, and the right to organize, the judicial system, and so much more. Differences between Trump and Harris forces, okay, are huge, and I agree on all those matters. They are huge. To claim those differences are insignificant is a nonsensical version, okay, of elitism. I don't know if it's elitism, but it's a nonsensical version of something, no matter how garbed in leftist types of rhetoric, says Norman Solomon. On foreign policy, Harris is the vice president in an administration fully on board with bipartisan, with the bipartisan kind, okay, of militarism that keeps boosting the Pentagon budget, bypassing diplomacy for ending the Ukraine war, while stoking the Cold War and with fast arms shipments to Israel, literally making possible the ongoing genocide in Gaza. At the same time, anyone who thinks that Trump, quote, finished the job, unquote, wouldn't be even worse for Palestinian people, hard as that is to imagine, doesn't grasp why Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is so eager for Trump to win. Okay, the leadership of the uncommitted movement has sorted out the political options. Okay, the terrain was well described by uncommitted leader uh, uh, Abbas Alawiya, who said last month, quote, at this time, our movement opposes the Donald Trump presidency, whose agenda includes plans to accelerate the killing in Gaza while intensifying the suppression of anti-war organizing in our movement is not recommending the third party vote in the presidential election, especially as third party votes in key swing states could help inadvertently deliver a Trump presidency, given our country's broken electoral college system. As his frequent collaborators, C.J. Policroniou noted last month, Noam Chomsky, quote, has repeatedly made the argument that voting for a third party or independent candidate in a swing state would accomplish nothing but increase the possibility of the most extreme and positively nuts candidate winning the election. Also, I might add, okay, a candidate who is losing his mental capacities, and as we can see day by day in this campaign, Trump is absolutely losing it. In an interview with Jacobin a few weeks ago, Alawiya had this to say: as someone who has family in South Lebanon right now, who are living under the terror of U.S. weapons raining down on them from the Israeli military. I do not have the luxury of giving up on the only one of the two major parties where there is room for this debate. To be clear, there's room for this debate not because the Democratic Party is friendly to Palestinian human rights. There's room for this debate because A, the Republican Party is not the party where we can have this conversation. Not a single federal elected official on the Republican side even supports a ceasefire as this genocide is raged on. And B, the Democratic Party speaks of being the party of justice and inclusion. And there are more and more of us within the party who are insisting the party change its immoral and legal support of sending weapons to harm and kill civilians. Also, similarly, another prominent uncommitted movement leader, Palestinian American Layla Elabed, said, quote, we urge uncommitted voters to register anti-Trump votes and would vote up and down the ballot. Our focus remains on building this anti-war coalition, both inside and outside of the Democratic Party. This is certainly not the presidential election that we want. And if you recall, I was arguing against such a presidential election from 2 years ago until now. Okay, but it's the one we have. Yes, it is the one we have. The immediate task is to prevent a Trump victory. His defeat is essential to keep doors open for progressive change. Okay, that a new presidency of Trump would slam shut with extreme right-wing power. And I completely agree with this. And if something were to happen with Trump, it would be even worse under J.D. Vance, because J.D. Vance is probably more competent at doing really bad things than Trump is. I have no question it would be worse under J.D. Vance, okay, than under Trump. I think the key paragraph in this piece is probably the paragraph where Norman Solomon points out on domestic policies involving racism, reproductive rights, civil liberties. He should have said also civil rights, the environment, climate, labor rights, the social safety net, civil rights. So there he goes. Civil rights there. Voting rights, LGBTQ rights, freedom of speech, and the right to organize. Okay, the judicial system. So much more. The differences Trump and Harris forces are huge. And I think that's right. I think the differences are huge. I mean, I don't think Harris, is any kind of Bernie Sanders advocate, or somebody like that. She lags behind in all sorts of ways. She's a neoliberal, as far as I can tell, has no commitment to MMT types of policies or anything like that. There's going to be lots of fighting with her while she's president. We're going to become sick and tired of her while she's president. But I'm pretty sure she's not going to introduce a full-blown dictatorship the way that Trump would. And I think she's going to be better on all of these other issues that were listed by Norman Solomon here. That is why I think this is a very good article, and why its recommendations about what to do should be taken very seriously. And so I think, there's that. I've been through a number of pieces today. I still have some to go. Robert Cope and Steve says, Doc, Kamala, seriously? Look, I've explained why, Steve. I understand you disagree. You have to accord me the same kind, of courtesy. Kamala, seriously, for the reasons outlined by Norman Solomon. I think this last article explains why, and in a pretty good way. Because I do know some people from California went to Nevada to campaign, for Kamala Harris. I expect they're going to keep doing it. Steve Wolfbrand says, I'm sorry, Doc, you can't be serious about it. I am very serious about that. I've already voted. I'm so serious about it. I've already voted. Well, I really have to leave, but I'm going to do one last thing here. I had two things left. Okay, the last piece I'm going to entertain tonight is a piece about the GOP plan to steal the election, okay, of 2024. Yes, Trump and the GOP have a plan to steal this election if they are defeated. This was done on October 15, 2024 by Tom Hartman. The pieces are already being put into place, which is giving me a terrible sense of deja vu. Sometimes I hate being right. Donald Trump is campaigning in blue states right now, including California, Colorado, and New York. It has pundits scratching their heads. Is it just all about his ego? Is he crazy or crazy like a fox? I'd argue, okay, the latter, that this is part of a strategy to legally seize the White House after he's lost both the popular vote and the Electoral College vote. Much like uh, 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 the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes did in the election of 1876. 8 months before the 2020 election, I wrote a largely ridiculed article for alternate.org predicting that Trump would lose the election, but would then use multiple phony states of swing state electors to try to get the Electoral College count thrown to the House of Representatives. Under the 12th Amendment, the Republican majority would crown him as president. I noted that I'd first heard of the plan that month from a Republican insider I knew from my days living and doing my radio TV program from Washington, D.C. As we all know now, that's pretty much exactly what happened. Fortunately, Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi stopped Trump and his merry band of corrupt lawyers and lawmakers, including Mike Johnson, who led the effort in the House from executing the plan. But not before 5 civilians and 3 police officers lay dead because Trump incited a violent attack on the Capitol and its final desperate attempts to pull it off. Now we know, I believe, why Donald Trump thinks it's so important to call out the military around Election Day this year. He expects millions of Americans to be in the street because his plan is for the House Republicans in the states and the Supreme Court to hand him the presidency regardless of the election's outcome. Last Friday, my Sirius XM uh, uh, colleague, whose name is Michelangelo Signorilli, mentioned to me on his program that a prominent right wing hate radio host had claimed Trump is campaigning in blue states right now so he can help out down ballot House members in those states. According to that host, it's all about holding the House so when the time comes for the election to be certified, Republicans will be able to deny that still necessary certification and vote Trump in themselves, which is giving me a terrible sense of deja vu. At the risk of again playing the reluctant role of Cassandra, here are some examples of how Trump and the GOP could try to steal the White House this winter, regardless of how the vote turns out, and how Republicans are today telegraphing this outcome. Article 2, the executive branch, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution and the 12th Amendment, which revises it, gives solely to the legislatures of the states the power to control the electors who will decide the presidential election. It does not say, and there is no federal law that says, that the people of the state shall vote for their choice of president, and then that vote shall be reflected in the electoral votes of the states. It's entirely up to each of the legislatures in the states without any input from the governor. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors, unquote, is how it appears in Article 2 of the Constitution. As Chief Justice Rehnquist wrote in the 2000 Bush v. Gore decision, when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the Florida Supreme Court's order for a recount that would have given the election to Al Gore, The individual citizen has no federal constitutional right to vote for electors for the President of the United States. That, of course, is something that we should change. State legislatures' power to select the manner for appointing electors is plenary. It may, if it so chooses, select the electors itself, which indeed was the manner used by state legislatures in several states for many years after the framing of our Constitution, unquote. Every state's legislature generally directs all their electors to vote for the candidate who won the majority in the state. The exceptions are Maine, okay, and also Nebraska, allowing for decisions to be split among parts of the states. The system we call, quote, the winner take all, unquote. But as Rehnquist noted, the legislature of a state, its combined House or Assembly and Senate can, by simple majority vote, direct its electors to vote for any candidate they want, even over the objection of their governor. The 2000 election, for example, when Florida Supreme Court ordered a complete recount of the vote for president in that state, but Jeb Bush and his Republicans knew that a full statewide recount would give Al Gore the presidency. It would have discovered the additional 45,599 votes for Al Gore that Florida Secretary Katherine Harris arbitrarily and illegally chose not to count, as the New York Times noted 1 year later. In other words, had the U.S. Supreme Court not intervened to stop the Florida recount, the Republicans in the Florida legislature were fully prepared to hand the entire Florida Electoral College vote and thus the White House to George W. Bush, even if a recount showed that Al Gore actually won the state. It was, after all, their constitutional right, as Rehnquist later noted in Bush v. Gore. As David Barstow and Somini Sengupta wrote for the New York Times on November 28, 2000, just before the Supreme Court intervened, the president of Florida Senate said today that Governor Jeb Bush has indicated his willingness to sign special legislation intended to award Florida's 25 electoral college votes to his brother, Governor George W. Bush of Texas, even as the election results were being contested, unquote. Quote, but, unquote, some say, quote again, Kamala Harris is the vice president, so she won't refuse to accept the electoral college votes like Trump wanted Pence to do, unquote. That's true, but irrelevant. While the updated Electoral Count Act explicitly redefines the vice president's role as purely ceremonial, it does not and could not, without a constitutional amendment, alter the power of individual Republican-controlled swing states to send Trump electors, claiming that the Harris winning results in their states are the result of voter fraud, to D.C. Regardless of how transparently dishonest such an effort would be, its primary result would throw to the Supreme Court a decision over which electors to count. Multiple court observers have noted how light the court's docket is this fall, because they speculate Roberts is fully expecting to play a role in the election, similar to what 5 Republicans on the court did in 2000 when they stopped the Florida recount, handing the White House to George W. Bush. The court could then declare the election flawed because of the alleged voter fraud. Republicans across the country, as well as Trump and Vance, are already preparing the ground for this claim and citing the 12th Amendment, but throw it to the House of Representatives. Under that scenario, each state's House delegation has one single vote for president. The Senate is not involved under the 12th Amendment. Right now, there are 26 states controlled by Republicans. The 26 to 24 vote would put Trump and Vance in the White House for the next 4 years. That strategy would require one or more individual states to either refuse to certify their vote or delaying certifying their vote, or to submit multiple slates of electors. And we're already hearing from both local elections officials and state legislators' rumblings. This is exactly what they intend to do. Another option to produce the same result would be for a majority vote in the House to refer to certify a Harris win. Which brings us back to Trump campaigning in blue states. As Ed Kilgore wrote for the New Yorker, As it happens, there are 10 highly competitive House races in California and New York, and the Trump appearance nearby could goose GOP turnout and promote party organizing efforts in ways that could make a difference in those contests. This brings us back to the scenario uh, 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 shared with me by Michelangelo. The new 2025 to 2026 House is sworn in on January 3rd, whereas the presidential vote is certified on January 6th. If Democrats win the House in November and are sworn in on January 3rd, it's unlikely Speaker Hakeem Jeffries would go along with Trump's scheme on January 6th, and the Republicans wouldn't have a necessary majority in any case. But if Republicans can hold the House, there's a good chance that Speaker Mike Johnson would happily hold the vote to declare Harris' win as fraudulent. After all, he's the guy who corralled fully 147 votes against certifying the 2020 election in the House. His being the ringleader of that effort is the main reason he's the Speaker right now. There are multiple razor-tight House races in California, Colorado, and New York. Trump and his conspirators may well believe that his holding rallies in these states represents the best bet for helping Republicans win those races, thus ensuring Johnson is in charge of the House so they can refuse certification, throw the case to themselves via the Supreme Court. Seizing control of the Senate would be the icing on the cake for this scheme, as it's also sworn in on January 3rd and also votes to certify the Electoral College vote. But a deadlock is only necessary in one of the two bodies of the legislature. If the 12th Amendment is invoked by 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court because of that deadlock, only the House votes for president. Keep in mind, J.D. Vance is still refusing to say that Trump lost the 2020 election. Most recently stonewalling the question 5 times in a podcast interview with Lulu Garcia Navarro of the New York Times last week. Donald Trump is also still asserting that he won, is already signaling that he intends to declare victory in November regardless of the, quote, official, unquote, outcome. Unlike in 2020, there are no longer Mitt Romney's, Adam Kinzinger's, or Liz Cheney's in Congress who could come up the works. The GOP today is unified in its assertion that voter fraud handed Joe Biden the 2020 presidency. This is the perfect setup for the scenarios I'm describing, and Republicans know it. They created it, in fact. The most likely scenario, though, would involve the local election officials gumming up the works by slow-walking counts, challenging counts, or outright refusing to certify counts at the state level long enough that several individual state votes can't be certified by January 6th, very much like in the election of 1876. This would provide an easy excuse for the 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court to intervene, invoke the 12th Amendment, and throwing the election to the House, guaranteeing victory for Trump. As Jim Rutenberg and Nick Corasaniti recently wrote for the New York Times, the Republican Party and its conservative allies are engaged in an unprecedented legal campaign targeting the American voting system. Their wide-ranging and methodical effort is laying the groundwork to contest an election that they argue falsely is already being rigged against former President Donald J. Trump. Quote, even if the cases fail, Mr. Trump's allies are building excuses to dispute the results while trying to empower thousands of local election officials to disrupt the process. Already, election board members in several states have moved to block certification of primary election tallies, including in the major swing county in Nevada last week. The updated electoral count sets a hard date of December 11th for states to certify the vote, but doesn't detail any consequences or outcomes if states fail to meet that date. Thus, in the case of conflict, confusion, or multiple lawsuits, the case would again end up before the 6 Republicans who control the Supreme Court. As was noted by Rutenberg and Corasaniti, quote, for his part, Mr. Whatley, the co-chair of the Republican National Committee, was non-committal, and reporters recently asked him if his party would seek to block certification in any states this fall. Quote, we're not going to cross any of those bridges right now, unquote, he said, unquote. Gee, you think they couldn't be telegraphing their plans any more clearly if they were skywriting them, says Tom. I wrapped up my March 2020 article predicting the GOP's upcoming fake elector strategy by imploring Democrats and the media to ring the alarm before they try to pull it off. Quote, get it into the media and repeat it over and over again. The GOP plans to claim Democratic voter fraud in this election, to steal the election for themselves, and they're already getting people primed for it, unquote. It's worth repeating today. Pass it along, says Tom. I think Tom, is totally right about that. There is that plan to steal the election. That explains why Trump is campaigning in states where the Democrats have a lock on winning, the presidential vote. It doesn't make sense for him to do that. It only makes sense if we think if he thinks he's going to lose anyway, and that's why he's campaigning in those states to try to help to throw the election into the House. I think that's a very, very likely scenario. So, I didn't want to cover that. I planned also to cover one last thing, which deals what is likely to happen if Trump were to become the president of the United States. But unfortunately, I have no time to do that tonight. But I recommend to you the following piece, again by Tom Hartman. The menstrual police are coming. GOP's plan for total control over the bodies of women. So that's the headline of that. I'm going to make sure that a link to that is in the comments. And I will take a few comments before I go over to join the. Steve says, I'm sorry, Doc, I'm out of here. Lana says, I don't tell people how to vote. I don't put up with people telling me how to vote. You do you. Can't wait until this election is over. Lana says, I thought Tucker interviewing Putin was a good thing. I can't deal with listening to him on a regular basis. So I agree, Lana. I think that Tucker's interviewing of Putin was a good thing. I think he did a good job. And that was fine with me. Steve says, Kamala is an empty vessel. I'll be dropping in occasionally just to see how wrong Doc was. Goodbye. So that's it for tonight. Thank you very much for coming. My attendance was really down on this stream, which indicates, I think, that support for foreign policy streams is much, much larger than support for domestic policy streams at this point, at least for this kind of domestic policy stream. I regret that. I think this was a very, very important stream. But I point out I had 58 people yesterday. I had only 11, not yesterday, but 2 days ago. I had only 11 people for this stream. And I think that's why. But this was a very important topic and a very important stream. People should have been here to watch it. I'm going to leave now and go over to help Dee. Hopefully she'll still be around.